Is Jordan Farmer. This is episode 36 of Uncommon Conversations. My guest today is Kaleb Long. We actually connected on and he actually had some a brilliant criticism of me. Not so much of me, but of the way I was explaining one of my points, and I really appreciated the feedback, the input, and so I asked him if he would come on the podcast because I felt like it would make for interesting conversation. And in reality, not only will it make interesting conversation, I think you'll have things to add to the conversation that none of my previous guests nor myself can give you. And I think that creates a little extra secret sauce. Let me see if I can. Sweet. Alrighty.
How are we
How
doing,
you doing,
Jordan?
man? I'm doing good. Doing good. Just just getting ready to have a dope ass conversation. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Long day of work, ready to start this conversation.
Right on. So go ahead and introduce yourself. And you, where you live, where you work, and then your political journey, if you please.
Okay. Well, my name's Kaleb. I'm from Ohio, so big OH, Ohio. Ohio. I work at a hospital. I work at Select Specialty Hospital, which is a pulmonary rehab facility. So I work with ventilators and see a lot of lung issues, as well as wound management, stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. And then I'm more grew up in a family household of Republicans, so I got that Republican foundation, and so come from a military background. My father was in the Army for 24 years, so he's where I get most of my political ideas from. So
Okay,
that's about it.
that's cool. That's
Yep.
cool. Have you ever did you ever have you read up and like interfaced with a lot of progressive thinkers or leaders or libertarian thinkers or leaders? Like, would you
Um,
say you're pretty familiar with those viewpoints, even if you disagree?
yes, I'm very familiar with them.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Well, that's awesome. And yeah. So, uh, what was your impression of Trump? And I have a question. Are you of mixed race?
No, no, primarily white, Caucasian.
Just Caucasian. Okay. Cool. Um, well then, yeah. So, what was your perspective on Trump as he sort of came onto the political scene? What was your reaction to him? Because the reaction from the Republican side was kind of mixed.
Yes, I kind of thought of him as like a populist, kind of like a
Mhm.
guy that can get a lot of votes in, and I think the Republican Party kind of ran with that. So, um, which I don't know, turned out okay for the most part. I don't know, he was going against Hillary Clinton in the 2016, you know, primaries. So, it was kind of like lesser of two evils, kind of. So I wasn't able to vote in 2016. I was 16 then, so but I would probably voted for Trump instead of Hillary.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I was kind of in a similar way of thinking. I voted third party just because of procedural reasons. If you get 5% in a third party slot, then you get into the debates the next cycle around. So it was a sort of a strategic play. Plus, the Electoral College in California means Hillary Clinton was going to get it anyway. So I figured I might as well make my vote of more use because it wasn't like a question if Trump could win in California. So
Right.
but I said at the time I would have voted for him just because I thought he was a gamble with a great upside and a potential downside, and Hillary Clinton was like a guaranteed shit sandwich. And I'd at least, was more risk tolerant and was willing to just say, hey, we'll give him a shot. And you touched on something really important there, the word populist. There's sort of different ways of defining it. You just do what you think is popular. Also, there's your sort of doing uh, what the people like in some sort of a sense. Um, and he definitely was not afraid to push buttons and say things that would piss people off. So I don't think he was just chasing popularity for its own sake. He would have been a much different kind of a president just to want to be popular.
Right.
And also, that word of populist sort of creates you stop thinking about, well, should we be aligned towards the people and the people's interest? Isn't that ultimately what politics is about? So if the people are into what's good for the people, which I think fundamentally we all are, it sort of made me like, I don't like that word populist because it's a way of dismissing what is sometimes needed. If the government isn't serving the needs of the people, then we need what I call a populist correction, where we sort of retake the institutions and say, vote them all out, get new people in, and sort of reset things. Because we know a lot of institutions are failing us, and there's some shuffling happening now, but I'd like to accelerate that shuffling.
Yeah. What do you mean by institutions?
So, Congress, like our government institutions, are actual people there. The news media, our education system, even our systems surrounding sort of how certain types of medicine and certain types of drugs are allowed and certain ones aren't. Like, I would go further in just sort of broadly fixing the system. So there's kind of a blend there of the institution and the policy. But for the most part, I just mean, I don't think these institutions are functioning in a way that is serving the people. I think they're corrupt, they're sold out, they're bought out by lobbyists. And so we need to correct for that. We need to try to realign their sort of vision for these things, like the FBI going after parents that are sort of being a little bit hostile at a parent-teacher meeting. That's a perversion of an institution, and we need to counterbalance that. The IRS under Obama going after right-wing charities and political organizations, and like it was very clear that that the right wing had a harder time getting through the IRS versus the left. And even if he didn't direct it himself, he didn't stop it. And so that's still a perversion of the institution and something that would need to be combated. So those are examples. But I think at this stage, we're sort of pervasively dealing with this. But yeah, so I wasn't so much like taboo to the word populist. I was already a libertarian, so kind of like on a third wave track anyways when that was all happening. And honestly, like, I thought Gary Johnson was, as a libertarian, even though I voted for him, I thought he was a crappy choice. I thought he was a really weak candidate himself. He was not up on, so there was a terrorist attack of a Christian church in Aleppo, I think, or a synagogue. I don't remember which, but it was a Judeo-Christian institution. And he was asked about that and didn't know it and sort of stumbled over his answer. And that was like the thing that buried him, which by itself isn't a bad thing, but just he generally was a weak advocate for his views. He was kind of a sticky guy. He was a salesman. He had his little taglines, but he didn't have like deeper layers or flexibility. And so I wasn't a huge fan of him, but anywho. But yeah, I definitely see, like, Trump was not a Republican. He was not a part of the team, both in his views and his action and his demeanor. But what shows, I think, a certain strength to the Republican Party and a certain respect for the people is that they let Trump get in. You know, when Bernie was pushing things on the left, on the Democrat side, they cut him out. Objectively, they've cut him out a few times. Andrew Yang dealt with the same thing in the 2020 cycle, where he was just objectively being suppressed in his fair shot, and they're supposed to be the Democrat Party, whereas the Republican Party let the maverick in, let the guy come and sort of, he literally took over the party, reformed a lot of the party's views, and it's now free market, but also pro-worker, which is an interesting hybrid that hasn't really existed yet.
No, I've never heard of it.
And then
So I think that's pretty interesting that you brought that up, because I've never even heard of that. So my background of politics is very, very diminished. I just know just on top layer. I'm not really familiar with all the, underneath of the iceberg as an expression. So I'll come out here.
No worries.
Learn so much.
This is the shit I love. This is the shit that I like to get into. So I'm happy to be illuminating things underneath the ice, and then it's obviously always up to you and to everyone to go think for yourself. What my strength is, I think, is asking good questions, so I get going in good directions of thought, versus necessarily, like, I'm not an expert, I'm not an academic, I haven't spent years studying. I just listen to a bunch of smart economists, and then just sort of think about, like, once I have a base level understanding of the concepts, what they're arguing over, what the flaws in those arguments are, what missing pieces to the answers might be, and I try to kind of go at it that way. And with everything I listen to, and some people will give you a lot of emotional manipulation, some people will give you a lot of fluff, and you
Mm-hmm.
want to weed those people out and go for the people that are talking about data, substance, analysis, perspective, um, and so that's sort of how I try to sort through them, because the fluff not only is useless, it's worse than useless because it contributes to our polarization in large part. It's a lot of stuff that's not meaningful but sets us against each other. And
Yeah, I
so,
agree with that.
yeah. So what are some of the things that you've seen since, how long have you been working where you're working? And what's some of the things you've seen since the pandemic or since you started working that you think we should know or have an in on?
So I started at Select uh, January of 2020, so just right before the pandemic started, really. Um, when it first started, the hospital, I guess CEOs didn't really know what to do. Um, there was a lot of back and forth if we're going to take COVID patients. If not, if the hospital's going to run, we might. There's a lot of back and forth, and a lot of policies were always changing. And it first started out as we weren't going to take any COVID patients whatsoever. So that happened within the first 2 months. So it was about March and April when it first started. Then it turned into, if the hospitals get overrun in May and June, July a little bit, then we'll start taking COVID patients in. But our hospital only has 3 airborne isolation rooms, so those rooms have negative air pressure, so that way it's ventilated better than regular rooms. So it's just basically a ventilator that sucks all the air into another vent and takes it out of the hospital. So that's basically what it is. So that was on the line for a little bit, and then I'll say about August to now, we take in COVID recovery patients. So these are patients that have passed their 2-week window from other hospitals, and then we take them in. They're not really on ventilators when we come in. I say 5% are on ventilators when they come in for us. But mostly they're up and able and off the ventilator. They're just here for lung rehab, pretty much, just to strengthen their lungs again. What I've seen is a lot of older people, about, I'll say 63 and above, pretty much, about 85% of the time. There was one guy that was about 40 years old. I don't think he had any underlying conditions. I think he just got hit hard with it. And it's basically just trying to get endurance in your lungs again, pretty much, kind of like cardio. So we just try to walk them as much as we can. Sitting up in chairs is a huge deal in our hospital. We try to mobilize our patients twice a day, either edge of bed or sitting up in a chair for like 2 hours. Is a tremendous help every day. So that's what we try to do in our hospital. And then,
Okay.
so, and if, so our policy is 3 weeks after the last positive test, they're out of isolation. So if they come in after the 2 weeks in our hospital and they still have another week, so they're in isolation and we have to wear N95 gown up and stuff like that. So, but it's weird because we don't put those patients in isolation rooms. We kind of leave the door open, but we still have to gown up. So it's kind of weird how to think about it. Yeah, so a big thing with COVID is just it just attacks the endurance of your lungs. Like, you got no stamina. Your wind is like that. Even just trying to sit up in bed, rolling around, you just drop your saturations really low. So that's what we work on. They usually last about 3 weeks in our hospital, so 21 days. That is the goal, to try to get them out into a like another physical therapy facility. that's more amped up than ours. So that's the goal.
Okay. Well, that's cool. That's cool that you work directly with sort of the worst affected. And so, if as you said, most of them are older, how many people have you seen below like 25 years old?
Never. I haven't seen
Never.
one. Yeah, I haven't seen
Never.
one.
Okay, so then that's consistent with sort of the demographics of the broader data. Yeah, I was just looking at it the other day, and the Delta variant, since the Delta variant came out, the data has hopped up for like the dangers to younger people. With COVID-19, it was like one in, I think it was 1 in 1,000, or no, 1 in 10,000 would die. And then with the Delta, it's like 2 in 1,000, so it went up 20-fold. Um, compared to the previous strain. And there's a lot of discussion about like overuse of vaccines and how that can sort of select for resistant strains or select for mutations that sort of mutate around those obstacles. But that's sort of that just to me gets down to the individual choosing again, like just letting the people that are vulnerable get that, letting the people that aren't, because that's kind of how the likelihood works. And I just think both because Pfizer themselves have had manufacturing issues. So Chantix was just recalled recently because it 14 months prior to the recall had been made with cancer-causing chemicals that they didn't know about, and that just happened. So it's not like even it's a Pfizer of 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It's the current leadership, and then manufacturing issues in general, and then even beyond that. There is underreporting of side effects. This is me sort of just telling the world I'm a moron, but I myself had I got sick, and I got sick right before I got the first Pfizer shot, and I had like the worst ass kicking of a lifetime for the 5 days after I got the shot. I've never been sick like that before. And so I didn't really know what to make of it. I felt like I couldn't attribute it to anything, but I didn't report it, is the point. So
Yeah.
there's lots of people, for a variety of reasons, wouldn't report their side effects even if they were there, or because so many people are told to expect side effects. You're going to feel sick. You might have a headache. You will have swelling, all that kind of stuff. There's going to be an underreporting of the seriousness of the side effects and maybe even the deaths, because
Right.
I don't know. I don't know so much with the deaths. Those are more concrete. You have autopsies and everything, but I just between having a distrust for the system and seeing these flaws, I just assume the issue with the vaccines is greater than they're telling us. But the number's still pretty okay. It's like 1 in 9,000 kids will die from the vaccine, and for older people, it's less likely than that. So the odds are still in that favor, but kind of ballpark stuff. You're talking about like 18 times as likely when it's very, very, very not likely. So um, when you're comparing the disease versus the vaccine for younger people, and then that's the thing: the demographics of the virus, it hurts older people less than younger people, and the vaccines hurt younger people more than older people. So it's sort of like it's hard. I haven't gotten a lot of good data to like really compare those demographics across those two spectrums, but that's what I have so far. Yeah, now in California, if you're 12 years or older and you want to go to school, they're mandating it. So we're past the point of stupid about 5 steps, unfortunately. But yeah, that's sort of just what I've been able to piece together. I don't know if anything you've seen would contradict what I sort of laid out there, but or if you have any additional. I wanted to touch on the masks too, because you said you use N95s.
Right.
How useful would any of the other masks people use be indoors, like for you guys?
I don't. Well, for our staffing, if you're unvaccinated, so our hospital kind of compromised. You see a lot of hospitals mandating the vaccines for staff. So our hospital kind of compromised, saying if you're unvaccinated, you're not getting fired, you're not leaving, but you do have to wear N95 for all the shift. So there's kind of like a thing where I'm like, well, I tell my colleagues that, they're trying to compromise with us and not trying to force this on us. So I think they trying to get the foundation under control instead of getting fired up about it. So I think they're understanding.
New York State mandated it for all the hospital workers there. I know California has mandated it for all the state workers. And I know the federal government has mandated it for all kinds of people. And I just had a friend, one of the other podcast guests, talk to me and talked about how they did this right after the unemployment ran out. Mm-hmm. So right as people would be most desperate to go back to work and be willing to go back to work to help get the economy fully back on track, they create a new obstacle, and people are at their, not their most desperate, because what we've seen is because a bunch of people have savings for the first time, they're not as desperate to go back to work. And so there's a bunch of people that otherwise would go back to work, but because the government broke it by making everyone not work and then had to buy it and bought it at a good price, which I'm happy about because of the special circumstances of this one recession. It wasn't anyone's fault that their jobs stopped going. We were in an upward spiral of economic growth that was like accelerating. So, anywho, yeah. So we could have had, so people aren't as desperate as they would be in a different sort of a scenario where unemployment, ended. Mm-hmm. But give it 3 months and they'll be there, because the money will run out, the savings will run out, and ultimately, even if you had a UBI, people are better off making more money and working for themselves than they are just being stagnant, both in terms of health, in terms of social interaction, and in terms of finances. So, so that sort of will always be there. People will sort of come to realize, I don't want to burn through my savings. I want to build it. I want to invest it. I want to make it make money for me. I want to turn it into early retirement instead of,
that's the goal.
Well, now I can just not work for 3 months now when I'm young and can work my ass off, It's a different perspective. And yeah, we all want to, I was just talking to some people who like hate landlords because like they think it's like a crappy way to retire, but I'm like, it doesn't really matter how you, in my opinion, you have ambition, ambition's good, you go get yours, try to retire young, and anyone that says anything about it or criticizes really how you do it, as long as you're not like actually hurting people. Like if you're the military industrial complex or military contractors, you could say that the capitalism there is kind of fucked up a little bit. Like it's kind of a dirtier side of it. Now, necessary, but a dirtier side of it. Like military, war, violence, and humans, we're never getting rid of that. So
never hasn't gone away yet. So
yeah. But if you keep repeating the same behavior, things will eventually change.
Exactly.
That's at least the way some people like to think about it. Anywho, so what has been your perspective on Biden? What have you seen? What has troubled you the least, the most? Has he done anything good in your eyes? Let's do the full spectrum there. We'll start with the good stuff because I think that's probably the hardest.
The good stuff. Well, I guess the good stuff, bittersweet, getting out of Afghanistan. I mean, that's a long due war that was overdue. So, got out of that war. Other than that, I can't really say if he has any other good things, unless you have any perspectives on that that I'm not aware of.
So, literally, the only thing I can think of, literally, is negated like 100-fold by his other policy. So, if you come here legally as an immigrant or as a tourist, you have to have a negative COVID test to come in. But if you're coming over the border, you don't. And there's a lot more people coming that way. And they test that, like, at one point, it was 20% of the people coming over that did have COVID that were testing positive for it. But they weren't testing them and saying if you're negative or saying if you're positive. They weren't testing them all, and they weren't holding them back if they tested positive. They were just sort of collecting the data to see, what sort of the ratio was.
Okay.
So, yeah, the one good thing I can really point to outside of the Afghanistan thing, which for me is like, maybe ultimately pulling out is the right answer, but if we can have a situation where we're not militarily involved and we're just financially supporting them, that might even be sort of ending the war for us, but supporting our partner in a war that they're engaged in. Because
Yeah.
allegedly we were technically friends and allies with the corrupt Afghani government. It was corrupt. We let a lot of child trafficking and child pedophilia and child brides happen in Afghanistan for these last 20 years, which I only found this out recently, and it made me sick to my stomach. But the obvious answer is don't let that happen. It's not leave so that it just happens without any chance of getting better.
Yes.
So, but I still think like useless war, useless loss of American lives, useless, activity is bad. Pakistan and China, indirectly and directly, and maybe even Iran too, were all supporting the Taliban and funding them on the other side of the mountains they kept retreating to.
Oh yeah.
So unless we address that internationally, it wasn't going to be fixed. And because Pakistan's technically our ally in some sense, but is also not, for obvious, like we used to be partners with them. And then we sort of went rogue. Like we were initially with the Mujahideen and the Taliban and the Pakistani intelligence back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the communists left and fell in Afghanistan, we withdrew our support from those people that we had supported. And then they started being aggressive towards us. And then we sort of retaliated with Afghanistan. So it's kind of a long-standing, cascading set of events. But obviously, we should have both sides of conflict divest if we can.
Mm-hmm.
If the Pakistanis and the Chinese and the Iranians would be hands off, not support the Taliban, and then we said we won't support the Afghani government, then at least that's like, a move in a good direction. But yeah, like I said, at the end of the day, useless war, endless conflict, we should be away from that, and I do agree that that's a good thing. But outside of that, he seems to mostly be breaking things and not fixing them.
Yes, I agree.
Mostly economically, foreign policy, where China just had their exercise where they sent a nuclear capable missile around the world just to be like, hey, look what we can do. And Taiwan, that was embarrassing. Taiwan is on the chopping block, and Hong Kong has already fallen. Now that happened before Trump, or before Biden. It happened under Trump, but the international community was against Trump and mostly against saying anything about Hong Kong. So it's not like it was just him, and it's not like he had help. So I don't really we can make the Chinese renegotiate trade deals because we control whether or not they trade with us, but we cannot hold them accountable for these broader things that we don't have control over, because it was through the Hong Kong government cooperating with the Chinese that it fell, and that it's fallen from a free state. So it's not like it happened through military conflict. It happened through coercion and partnership, which is the Chinese method. They're much smarter than the Russians, and much smarter than the Iranians, and much smarter than, well, the Pakistanis are pretty smart. They're playing it both ways. They're friends with both of us somehow, which is crazy.
They're the middleman.
Yeah. They're like Switzerland, but in the Middle East. They're like, hey, we just want to make money, bro. We'll cool with both sides.
Yeah, we'll do whatever.
We'll just do what we're being told. So, but yeah, when it comes to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, can you break down some of the you criticized in a good way? I appreciate it, but you did say that I did not advocate for, sort of lay out the flaws with the withdrawal fully. And I agreed with you, actually. When I was doing it, I was kind of like, man, I know there's more, but I didn't have it, right there available to be talked about, like other things I am more ready to go on. So please lay out your criticisms of that, and criticisms of Biden in general.
Yes. So it all falls back on Biden. Even though he has his cabinet with decorated generals around him and stuff. Primarily falls back on Biden, that he's the commander in chief. He makes the calls, and so like I said, my dad was in the military. He was in the Army. He served in Afghanistan in 2012, and so he worked with the interpreters over there in Afghanistan, and had a bunch of allies there that he's worked with. And so he was kind of telling me all this stuff, and I'm like, wow, that kind of makes sense. And so the first thing that I think people are unaware of is that there's these how do I describe it? Kind of like these Afghanistan Navy SEALs, I guess. I think they're called commandos, and these guys were fighting the Taliban, coming into their territory and stuff. And the commandos are really good at what they do, as long as they have help from the U.S., like air support or just infantry coming in and backing them up. So they're in the middle of a firefight, and they're trying to call for backup, but there's no feedback coming back because Biden has already left in the middle of the night. So these guys were fighting, and they fought and fought until they ran out of ammo and surrendered. And so Biden left in the middle of the night and got caught red-handed. So he's trying to come back, and he's trying to make his default to Kabul, which is the main city in Afghanistan, has an airport, So what he should have done is that abandoned Bagram, which is in the northern part of Afghanistan. It's a base. It's huge. Has two big runways that can fit like 100 C-170 planes just down the runway. So he could have got allies back into that base. It's a really good base because it has a territorial defense. So it's kind of like surrounded. It's at like the bottom of a mountain, and it's surrounded by the mountains. And so it would have been a really good fallback plan because just of that territorial defense, and it's huge. And so first he should have done was got the allies out, the Terps, American citizens, or Great Britain was in there, so they could have fell back to that. The Hungarians were working with the U.S. at the time, and so they should have done that. They should have just started, flying people out. They have 100, planes on each side, so they could have easily done that. And then they could have, after got the allies out, start taking equipment. If the equipment was too heavy, you can just, start blowing it up. Take all the ammo, all the weapons, stuff like that, all the cargo. So you get that next. That's the next wave. And then you start drawing back, military men, women, start flying them out. And then my dad's point of view was that you should have kept like a battalion at Bagram just for you have CIA there, Marines there just to, keep the base. Because, back in, after World War II, we had bases in Japan, Germany, stuff like that. So I think that would help out Afghanistan a lot if they just had the backbone of the U.S. helping them with the systemic, army there. So I think that's what it should have done, what should have happened. And so my dad, he was pretty upset about this. So he's a retired vet now. He served 24 years and retired as a first sergeant. So that's about like an E9, E10, I believe. And so he has all these connections everywhere. So he was actually trying to get a flight there to help his buddies get out. So he's calling. Somehow he made contact with this Australian contractor that has a couple planes that he has. So he got in contact with them. And then he says that his planes are in Israel. So my dad's like, okay, I might try to catch a flight to Israel to help, identify the Terps that he's friends with and stuff. But he couldn't get a flight out. But so that was the main problem. Two problems with that was getting a flight to Israel and getting funding for this. And so he was asking, he reached out to like Ohio representatives and the Hungarian government actually. So, but I'm not sure where he got the funding at, but he did get 6 of his buddies out.
Dude, that's awesome. That's awesome. So did he go with people or did he go by himself?
He ended up not going. But he was in contact with all of them. He actually had his Terps actually reached out to him and asked him on Facebook like, hey, we need your help. Are you in?
So he sort of provided logistical support, like
yes.
putting the people together.
Yep. So
that's
that
awesome.
was his main role in that.
Well, I just want to say this now, and then we can continue on in the conversation. If you or if he wants to run for office and just needs to understand the underlying policies to sort of fix the system, my content and me as a consultant like that, and I'm not a paid consultant. I mean, just I will do it for free if the person's willing to actually be the real deal.
Right.
I could break it down. I could break down a full platform in a 4-hour presentation and, get them from A to Z. And then guys like Tim Kennedy, former MMA fighter, former Green Beret, guys like
Oh yeah, I know Tim
Brian
Kennedy,
Stan, another former MMA fighter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Tim Kennedy actually went and got people out
Oh yeah,
in Afghanistan.
yeah,
But even guys like Brian Stan,
yeah,
Brian Stan's a currently very successful CEO of multiple companies. He used to work in charity and was a former MMA fighter and I believe a Marine. I'm 99% sure he was specifically a Marine. Guys like that, just guys that have a good head on their shoulders, only care about serving the people and just want to understand, I'm the person to talk to. Because honestly, these policy things aren't that complicated. Like, we argue over tax cuts or tax hikes, but the evidence shows, and it's called the Ron curve, is this particular curve. As government spending hits 25 to 30% of GDP, you get the most growth, and then as you deviate from that middle ground, it just gets slow. So no government spending means no growth. 100% taxation means no growth, and then at the middle, it meets in that 25 to 30%. There's literally 1,000 things like that are relatively simple if you listen to experts, piece it together, and just have some common sense.
right.
But we're intentionally pinned against each other to fight over things that are bullshit, just so that we are not handling corruption, money, and politics and these bigger things that we all agree on, but we're stuck arguing over the other aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
Abortion's the only one where it really is, what are you going to choose to think about the issue? Kind of will get you where you want to go. I'm in the position where in almost all cases I'm against abortion, but I don't know how to execute a law effectively that will allow for example, abortions if the mother's life is in danger, or if like the baby will die eventually, like or is dying actively in the woman, and would just create a sort of parasitic, toxic, foreign object that her body has to try to reject. And I'm not up on the medical stuff. I don't know what all the medical conditions are that would create that scenario. I've heard from some people there aren't any. Most of the people that I've heard that I know would be familiar with it, which is women that have sort of been more deeper on the investigations in these issues, say that there are conditions where a woman's life is in danger and abortion is the right option. So I have to leave that open, and then it's a question of, will a doctor approve it? What if they don't? What are the double checks? How do you verify the conditions are accurate if the doctor says, yes, you can get an abortion? All those things sort of keep me from being able to say, this is the law I'll advocate for. But the philosophy of the value of the human life is relatively straightforward to me. There's questions, but the questions always get answered with human life is more valuable than those other sort of considerations. But that's his own thing. A lot of people disagree on abortion, and that's the only sort of hot button topic that is, even in me, unresolved. And so that's the only real major area of conflict. If you avoid abortion, everything else is relatively common sense. Like, no one wants poor people to be extra poor. No one wants criminals running the streets or murderers or rapists. No one wants corruption in government. Everyone wants to have a good economy but take care of the environment. Like, there is no such thing as rape culture. We all think rape is evil and horrible. Like, there's not disagreement. It's just we're sort of pinned against each other in weird ways because that keeps the system going. But anyways, yeah, so if he's interested, if you're interested, the proper question is not, are you the ideal candidate? The proper question is, would you be better than the assholes already in office? And in most cases, the answer is yes.
Most cases,
so,
yes.
Yeah, so pass on the word. And I don't care if anyone does come to me for answers. I don't care if they do their own research, but I'm available, making myself available.
So are you going to school for political science or anything like that, or are you just interested in this?
So I've just been I hated school. I either felt like I wasn't getting enough attention in certain areas like English, where I was a little bit weaker, history, where I didn't have well-established studying habits, so I didn't really know how to like memorize information in that way, and so I was just kind of left behind. And then with math and like science, I would usually get it in like the first 5 minutes of class.
Yes.
And so I was either wasting my time or lost, and I had to be around a bunch of assholes I didn't like. And I'm an introvert, and I like learning on my own. Like what I discovered that when I was 15, and YouTube and just listening to people that have already studied and already developed opinions and stuff like that is a much quicker way to absorb the gist of an issue than reading book after book after book about like the same old sort of facts, but not necessarily the actual like arguments or the philosophy or the broader arguments. So I went to college. I dropped out after the second semester because I couldn't do full-time school and full-time work because I was doing 10-hour shifts plus
that's
like 10-hour graveyard shifts plus college during the day, and it was spread out, so I didn't get sleep. So I just didn't discipline or schedule it well enough to really make it work, and I didn't like it. And I still felt like it was a waste of my time, and my professors were political. So all of that just made me be like, no, thank you. I'm good. I just now was literally talking today about how going to the actual sources of academic information, the scientists, the philosophers, the sociologists, the mathematicians, the people that actually came up with the original knowledge, the Einsteins of those fields, if I just go read them directly and go learn from textbooks directly, I bypass all this stuff with the teachers. I can find lectures online. Mm-hmm. So right now I sort of have reoriented around wanting to formally educate myself in political science and all these things. Because I've had debates, they're not debates, but I've had encounters with asshole ex or current professors in political science that want to play semantic and vocabulary games with me, where they want me to they do the thing in the class where they want to ask a question that doesn't give you any sort of hint at the content of the issue, just so that they can give you the answer.
All right.
But they won't give me the answer when I'm asking them about something, and they ask me, how can you academically and verbally in the perfect way articulate the core ideology of traditional classic liberal political thinking? And I'm like, that doesn't mean shit compared to the policies that the current Democrat Party supports. It doesn't mean anything related to that. It's what people believe, the ideas in their head, the arguments and the facts surrounding that, and what it all actually means. It's much more relevant to politics, to actual solutions. Mm-hmm. If you want to get stuck up in esoteric, philosophical, or I already said semantic games like that, I want to learn how to play those games so I can shut those people up too. But fundamentally, they're playing games and wasting everyone's time. And this is the issue with our academic institutions. They want to be 3 chapters ahead of you so they could keep the edge, but they don't just want to help teach you how to learn it yourself. Because then they would not be able to be that in that role. Strength and conditioning coaches that want to have a lot of clients but don't teach them anything. Teachers that want to have you constantly coming back to class, but they really piecemeal how fast you learn. All of that is a waste of time and knowledge. And when it comes to politics, it's so much more important than anyone making money that it's horseshit that they do it this way, in my opinion. It offends me to my core that people more in all cases harder working and more disciplined than I am have not handled these discussions, haven't investigated the angles I've investigated that create obvious common ground. Out of all the CO2 that goes into the atmosphere and comes back down, 5% is human activity. That's relevant to the whole discussion, and no one talks about it. And that is on purpose, and that's disgusting.
That makes sense, yes.
And so I'm doing my thing. I am going to get that formal education the way I can actually pull it off without ripping people's heads off out of frustration. So I do want to go down that road, but I consider what I do to be political engineering, not political science, which is sort of, semantic games a little bit. But the point is, it doesn't matter what the facts are out there. It's about leveraging it towards the goals everyone agrees on. and understanding how the systems work and trying to integrate all that into one worldview, which is what I did for my own sake of understanding. And now I'm just trying to elevate the political conversation, because once we get that knowledge out there, then people can have their own talks, they can have their own analysis, they can create their own solutions, and hopefully I'll create a bunch of people that are even better than I will ever be, and they can, go do that work too. But until then, I'm just doing what I can do as best I can, and I'll sacrifice the time for these things because they do matter, even though I'm making no money off of it yet. I have business ideas and a bunch of things I'm going to do to make sure I'm financially successful.
Good.
And I'm taking a job at Amazon right now just so I can, take advantage of the holiday pay and the bonuses and
of course,
make some good money and cover my bills. But yeah, I'm doing this just because it needs to be done. I'm not doing it because anyone's paying me, which creates some frustration in me. Sometimes I'm like, man, why am I spending so much time on this? But then I'm like, I know exactly why I'm spending so much time on this, and I just got to find the right balance for myself and for my family and my broader concerns, because you don't want to sacrifice your life for other people entirely. That's not healthy on any level, and many people make that mistake in many areas of their life. They sacrifice their own well-being for the sake of, giving to others or in the name of doing stuff for others. And some would argue that it comes from a lack of self-esteem, a lack of valuing yourself appropriately, and understanding that you can give a lot more when you're your best self versus when you're, not your best self, so to speak. So I'm sort of touching on a lot of stuff there, but
you just keep at it and start building itself. So if you keep,
so far it's working. I'm making traction, and the more I do it, all of this is long-term investment too. I don't know the opportunities or the money that's going to come eventually from this, but I'm sure something will come from it, and it'll definitely all work towards, and the work itself is the success, which is the best thing. Like it's if I can talk to one person and get one good idea in their head, and then that propagates over time, like that helps the whole thing a lot better. So it's worth it. And most people are too uncomfortable disagreeing with every single person on politics. But I've always known that in the argument, I gain knowledge. In the argument, I gain perspective. And I get criticisms from people that help me grow and help me get better. And so because I'm properly constituted around not having an attachment to my worldview, I'm the guy for the job. Because as soon as good new information comes in, I change my mind. I'll accept it. I'll adapt evolve my perspective and start advocating for the new version of what I believe, because it's all a learning process. It's like, imagine if someone was like, or some people do this, like, imagine if people were like, yo, geometry is the real math. And then other people are like, nah, it's trigonometry. That's where it's at. And then someone else is like, nah, arithmetic is the only math that is really math. It'd be silly, but that's what we do politically. We're like, well, these sets of ideas are good, and these sets of ideas are shit because these sets of ideas are good. Instead of like, there's value here, there's value here. How do we sort of see all of it and try to integrate it and see the issues for what they are?
Yeah, that's a good idea to look at it.
It's very emotionally painful though. So I do just give people, I try to have patience. I try to be understanding, because I know it's not seamless and easy to change your worldview. But the more you do it, the more you evolve, the more you're willing to open your mind up, the easier it gets.
So I want to ask you about California. So politically, is there more conservatives than what we think there is in California, or
so it's about a third all around Fresno and in the agricultural communities and in the lower populated parts of California, and also up north, like in the woods, in the very northern part of California, is a lot of conservative leaning people, but we're outnumbered by LA and the Bay Area by 2-1. So it's twice as many Democrats as Republicans, but you got to think that's out of like 25 million voters. So there's like 8 million Republicans in California. And we're very active. We're definitely plugged in. There's a lot of people that I'm going to start being more aggressively trying to contact and trying to like get a hold of and work with people that are protesting, people that are advocating for things on the streets, because I believe in bringing both sides together anyway, so it's going to be like across the board I'm going to be reaching out, but specifically with the Republicans of California, if they can have a better way of advocating for their worldview or just have more support or even just like what I don't know, just for all the reasons I want to get involved and try to help everyone. I was just talking to a guy who was on a previous podcast of mine, and I said, I want to do a podcast with you on achieving the progressive agenda from a moderate perspective. Because there are things that they bring up that I value and we all agree on, like it's a tragedy if you can't get access to healthcare and you die as a result of just not having some good or service that could have been paid for in some way. Now, there's a question of pricing and how the current system inflates prices, and you can only get coverage if you have insurance, and there's all these barriers, and you can only work in the field if you get all these credentials and go to school for all these years. So there's so many issues with it that the goal of getting it to people is the universal sort of principle, and it's a question of how do we get there and what is the sort of right balance between traditional conservative and traditional-ish progressive views. And I think I'm pretty good at sort of bridging that. So I wanted to do that podcast with him, but I will do that with anyone because I know we agree on the goals and I know we can agree on the solutions because we're not off basis. We just don't have the full picture. And that's sort of the biggest issue in politics. And so because I can meet people in the middle there and I just say, hey, I thought what you did. I agree that there's value in that perspective. And these are just my further thoughts. Let me know what you think. You know, it's not non-threatening as best as political conversation can be non-threatening, which is, you know.
So you brought up healthcare.
It's often toxic, so.
Yeah, so you brought up healthcare, which is, I think, is a major thing going on right now, especially with COVID. How you think we can fix the healthcare system?
So there's sort of within the system solutions. I'll talk about those first. Price transparency is something that Trump was pushing for. And if we can make it the law of the land to have not just price transparency, but I would create a law that says you have equality of healthcare prices. Meaning, if I make a drug and I sell it to anyone, I sell it to everyone for the same price. There's no special deals, there's no kickbacks, there's no playing the game. You just create a price, you just offer it for that price, and it's out there in the public for people to shop with and compete. That solves the consumer industry, the consumer market issue, so that people have the proper feedback and pricing to get that part of it going. In terms of investment, I love the free market because it allows for creativity, patents, the creation of new products. And so that is already driving the investment side of the healthcare industry. So that's fine. We don't even have to mess with that. That's honestly, they're getting too much money on that side of it. And that's where the pricing and bringing pricing down will help a little bit. And then there's the production side. There's actually the service people, the people that have gone to the schools and gotten the training and are providing the services and the labor. And then there's the goods. On the labor side, education, making it so that the people that know they want to be a doctor when they're 12 can start training to be a doctor when they're 12 instead of 5 years of building a resume to go spend 5 years at a college to go spend 5 years in residency that then go actually give healthcare. You could have them giving healthcare by the age of 20 instead of 32. So that will massively increase at the doctor level, the labor availability and the services availability, as well as nurses. Like you can apply that principle to everything else, to nurses and all that kind of stuff. High schoolers can start learning nursing, and it's a great career to go into. It helps save lives. Like it's literally amazing in that way. And then on the good side, I would change the patent system so that you get a 15% royalty on the sales of your creations, but you don't get to be the only producer of those goods unless if you own 51% of a company and you have the patent, then they don't pay that 15% royalty to you because it's being returned to them. So there's an incentive to be producing it yourself, and you have an inherent 15% market advantage over all of your competitors. But if you try to get 20% profit, then they'll come in and they'll compete with you. So it creates a limited sort of a return. But that means also the patents never expire, so that that 15% is eternal. You will always be making that. It doesn't run out after 20 years or 10 years, which means you don't have to keep creating new medications, to keep creating like new patents. So yeah, so that's sort of the within the system stuff, and then fixing the overall system. Divorce it from jobs. Like, you having a job and you having healthcare should not be related. And so that's, I don't know how you fix that
Right.
exactly, because it's like they should be allowed to offer you a better insurance package. I'm not against the company doing that, but you need to break that up. And the only way I would know how to do it is to offer people a healthcare savings account where you get $2,500 a year towards your healthcare costs, and we all get it, so we can donate it to other people or loan it to them with a little bit of interest or with no interest within it, like an enclosed system, so we can all sort of share those accounts voluntarily. And that's it. That's sort of my string of adjustments I would take around the healthcare system to try to make it work more efficiently. And yeah.
So going back to the schooling, in Ohio, I don't know if you guys had these in California or not, but we had these schools called vocational schools. And so it's like a little school that has a little bit of everything. It has cosmetology, diesel mechanics, power linemen, nursing, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So you can start that sophomore year, and that way you can start building your education up and start getting licensed when you're out of high school. So we have one of those in Ohio. I think they're all around the state. So going back to that.
Yeah, so there you go. That's a great example. In California, I'm not aware. So you can, if you're like a super exceptional student, you can start to like go and take classes at your local college, and there is some stuff like that, but it's not necessarily, I've never heard of it being geared towards any career, not for engineers, not for healthcare workers or anything like that. But yeah, that exact type of a policy is exactly the kinds of things we'd want to adopt. Like, the details and the specific versions of the way people go in this direction don't really matter to me as much as, like, I'll tell you what I think the ideal is, and we can just try to move in that direction, and that's good enough progress for progress's sake. So adopting what you just said and making that like a thing in California and popularizing it, letting people know that they can have that like that would be a great thing to adopt for sure. But I also believe in a voucher system for the education system. So that would sort of broadly open up innovation in the education system. And so you can have engineering schools, engineering high schools, healthcare high schools, sports high schools, artist high schools, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
someone said
this vocational school is like open to everyone. Even if you're on the lower side of academic, you can just go straight into it and start your career after high school like that. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Ohio is a moderate state. They're always sort of tipping the balance. All those little battleground states are usually tipping the balance of of things. But if you look at the local policies, they're moderate in their composition. A lot of people that are in your region would agree with a lot of my things I'm advocating for, because politically you guys are closer to that. You're more moderate and less like Texas and California are on the poles, and Ohio's kind of a good combo of the two. Someone just put a question up there just saying that the price control thing I advocated for, the equality of pricing and price transparency, is sort of not free market. And I'll agree with them on that. But I also think, I think two things. One, the consequences are not very big for doing that. Like, they can just find their profit a different way. It's not like they can't, like, you're not controlling the price. You're just saying you can only have one price. You can't charge different prices for different people. But in a system where you have open competition and a true free market, then you have price transparency anyways. And people don't want to spend extra money, so they'll know which hospitals give the best care for the best procedures. If you're getting a thing like a colonoscopy, you can shop around ahead of time. It's something you're planning for. It's not an emergency healthcare thing. So ideally, you wouldn't need the Price Equality Act, but that's sort of a policy in the current system without fixing everything that can kind of create a huge positive effect. So they brought up that question. I thought it was a good one, so I wanted to address it. Like, I agree with them, but I also just think like we are where we are with it, and progress is progress. A single payer system would be progress from our current system, because then at least you get health care and you get the access, even if it's manipulated in all these ways. We're about to hit the 1 hour mark. You want to hop on for another one?
Yeah, I can do that.
All right.